Welcome to the Digital Defenders United podcast. I'm excited to introduce a trio of remarkable guests united by a common commitment to protecting children in our modern era. First, meet Adam Boyd. He's the founder of the Dad Army, a group fiercely advocating for children's rights and safety. Adam brings a wealth of experience from his career in law enforcement, where he specialized as a detective in crimes against women and children and served as a SWAT operator. He also founded Soulful Training and Toward a Patriot, initiatives that empower individuals to navigate life's challenges through resilience and adventure. We're also joined by Soloman Friedman and Sarah Bain. Both are partners at Ethical Capital Partners, or ECP, which is the company that owns ALO, which owns PornHub and most of the largest adult content platforms. Ironically, ECP is actually at the forefront of implementing some cutting-edge technology and safety protocols to ensure every piece of content on their platforms is consensual, vetted, and legal. Their efforts to moderate and safeguard their platforms not only set new tech industry standards, but also serve as a model for law enforcement and technology platforms worldwide. So today, we're uniting diverse viewpoints to focus on a common goal, the well-being of children. So we'll explore effective solutions-oriented approaches to enhancing digital safety, and also discuss how collaboration, despite differing backgrounds, can foster significant advancements in protecting children today and for generations to come. So let's dive into this crucial conversation. So Adam, can you share what inspired you to focus on children's rights and safety?
What kind of got me involved was, having a child of my own and seeing how important it was to make sure that our children are protected. And I think my background in law enforcement and seeing all kind of terrible things happen to kids, whether it be physical abuse, sexual abuse, and whatnot, after a long career, you start to see some of those 10, 11, 12-year-olds that these happen to now become, an adult that maybe is not making the best decisions, and they're involved in a life of crime, or they're doing things that really aren't conducive to being productive to society. And I really wanted to just make sure that I give back to the community and try to make sure that, our kids are protected as much as possible. I left law enforcement to go into the wellness business. I've worked with first responders and military to make sure that they are resilient and they have wellness programs to go with. I'm also branching out into some of the advocacy spaces where I'm working with Sane Nurse and maybe some of the victims there to give back in that way. And Dad Army just seemed like a great fit between my law enforcement background, my wellness background, and my drive to protect children in this country. It just seemed like a great fit.
I love it. So I want to give you the floor to ask Soloman and Sarah your questions, whether it's things you've heard, be it accusations or otherwise, or just questions and concerns you might have from your law enforcement background when it comes to their platforms and the safety of the content there.
What steps are you guys currently taking to ensure safety of children and to draw that line between adult and child?
I'll start with that. So first of all, my name is Soloman Friedman. I'm a partner at Ethical Capital Partners, the ownership group that acquired ALO in March of 2023. My role in the ownership group is as a vice president of compliance. And what I really bring to that is my legal background and experience. I was a defense attorney for 14 years. So don't hold that against me as former law enforcement. There's many important parts of the system, but really during that time, in defending a number of the cases that I did, I saw where law enforcement was falling short. In other words, where prosecutions were failing, where investigations were failing for technical reasons, for forensic reasons. So that's part of the lens that I bring in now working on the other side of the fence and trying to ensure that those gaps are filled and that law enforcement have the tools that they need. So I'll talk about the platform. You asked about the platform in terms of keeping young people safe. So first of all, at the outset, it starts with a commitment. And that commitment is a zero tolerance policy for child sex abuse material, for any material that exploits young people. And just so you know, we go far beyond the legal definition of child sex abuse material, particularly in the United States, where it's limited to real depictions, that is real depictions of minors. The platforms that ALO operates strictly ban even graphical depictions, that is animations, or play acting depictions of people under the age of 18, that is 100% banned. Now, how do you actually enforce that? So it starts with the verified uploader requirement. ALO requires, in order for an individual to be eligible to upload content to any of the platforms, PornHub being the most popular, to verify their identity. That is to confirm who they are with government documentation, and biometric assessments that they match that documentation that they're a live person before they're even eligible to upload content. So what that does is a couple of things. First of all, you now have easily the age, of course, and the consent of the uploader, but it also, and to put your law enforcement hat back on for a minute, it gives real accountability to uploaders. So for example, last year, NECMEC released their 2023 report in which they detailed the number of reports they get from electronic service providers. So that's everything from ALO's platforms to Facebook, Microsoft, and Google. Facebook reported about 20 million instances of suspected child sex abuse material, when ALO, through all its platforms, reported about 2,500. And the reason is you have to be a very special kind of stupid to try to upload child sex abuse material after having provided your real and verified government ID. So it starts at the verified uploader stage, but it doesn't stop there. Once an individual's identity has been verified, they are now eligible to submit content not to be uploaded instantaneously. There's no instant uploading on any of ALO's platforms. Everything has computer and human moderation. We subscribe to every single available hash list. Those are lists of digital signatures provided by law enforcement and NGOs like NECMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Internet Watch Foundation, the United Kingdom, and every piece of content is scanned against those databases. We also subscribe to NECMEC's Take It Down program as a participating company. So every piece of content is scanned. If it passes all of those checks, it then goes to human moderation. Every piece of content is reviewed by a human moderator to confirm both the identity of the individuals, age and consent, and also to ensure that it complies with the law and all of our terms of service. So that's sort of the, we could talk about this for an hour just on those topics, but that's the 100-mile overview, verifying uploaders and real content moderation of every single piece of content on the platform.
So what's the process? Yeah.
Adam, if I could just add, following from something Soloman picked up on. So as Kim said, my name is Sarah Bain. I'm also a partner at Ethical Capital Partners. And the work that I work in is the stakeholder engagement. And so there's the side of, when we acquired this company, we certainly had a very good sense of all of the protocols that were in place already. And one of the things that we recognized with regards to those safeguards is that the public didn't know about them. And we think that's a real disservice to the internet as a whole, but also to governments, to the public, to groups like yours, where there's a lack of understanding about what those safeguards are. And so if we have safeguards or we have protocols in place that people don't know about, then it's really hard for them to educate themselves and know how to use them properly. And so one of the first thing that you see, obviously, when you come onto our sites is that you don't see anything. You don't see any of the content because you have to acknowledge your age. But there's also a really important piece, which is the parental control. You don't have to search through our websites like so many other online platforms. You don't search for how to keep this site out of children's access. There's parental control, guardian controls right on the home page. And so these sort of really upfront and very transparent forms of communication are really important to us. And to one of the points that Soloman made is that starts from a place of a commitment. And we have a commitment that we have a zero tolerance for any minors on our website visiting or in the content, as Saul was mentioning. So that's a commitment we've made. But the second layer of that is communications. And so Kim and yourself being open to having conversations like this with us are so important because we need people to understand, because understanding is that knowledge really allows people to better equip themselves when they are having engagements on online platforms. So I just wanted to add, really re-emphasize that this is a commitment that we're making as a company.
Okay. So I just want to be clear of what you're saying. So Soloman, you started talking about, age verification for the people that are uploading videos. And Sarah, I noticed you mentioned that there's an age, did I get this correct? There's an age verification for those who are actually trying to get into the website and actually watch, or is there nothing in place there?
So we require that visitors to the website confirm that they're over 18 prior to seeing any explicit content. You can try that yourself, Adam. You can go to any one of the platforms. Just clear your cookies if you've been there before. I'm not saying you have or you haven't, maybe for research, but just clear your cookies so it'll think it's the first time you're going, or look at it in incognito mode. And you'll see that before seeing any explicit content, there's a link to the parental controls, because we really want parents to be able to have control and have all the resources they need. We do not want a single underage visitor on our site. We do not want any children to be able to access our site. Now, of course, that has to be effective, those means, and I'm happy to talk about our view on age verification. They have to actually keep young people off the platforms while still, of course, respecting the privacy of individuals who have a constitutional right to access this material. Our view, by the way, and we have advocated for this publicly, it's not the first time we're discussing this, is that age verification ought to operate at the device or operating system level. We want our platforms to be banned by default. I'll say that again because it's surprising when people hear me say it. They should be banned by default from all operating systems until an individual has verified that they are an adult, because we want absolutely no young people accessing our platforms whatsoever.
So is those accessing the platforms on the viewer side going through the same like government, you have to show ID and whatnot, or is it simple like if I go to the Jack Daniels website, I know because I was there yesterday trying to get them to sponsor an event. But you just type in your birthday, right? And then you're in. Like, are you 21? Oh yeah, 4/20 of 1980. And like, yeah. Is it like that, or do you have to actually verify that you're over 18?
So for visitors, that is users going to the website to browse it, they need to affirm that they're over 18, and there's a link to parental controls. Now, we know that's not the end of the conversation. That, as you said, an individual can say they're over 18. What has to happen, and what we've done since acquiring the company, has been very public about our desire to have the operating systems manufacturers, Apple, Google, and Microsoft, to implement device-based age verification. We are supportive of that. As I often say, they are the lock, they are the key, we will be the lock. We will happily collaborate with any device-based age verification scheme. We've tested these around the world. We're happy to work with any government to get that done. What we won't do, Adam, and I'll be very clear about this, is we won't require individuals on a site-by-site basis to provide their personal information simply to look at content. We're of the view that, first of all, that doesn't work. People just go to another adult website. They circumvent that. Second of all, it also exposes users' personal information to really significant jeopardy. It's a bad idea. And in the states, for example, that have imposed that, we have withdrawn our services from those states. We will not require Americans or any visitors to provide their personal information to every site that they visit in order to see legal adult content.
So, yeah, one of the issues that I wanted to bring up was you guys have seemingly like fled some states that are trying to require these things. And you can see from a perspective of parents how that looks really bad, right?
Well, Adam, I disagree. And I wouldn't say that we have fled those states. It goes like this. Let's take Texas for an example. Okay. Texas passes a law that says adult platforms have to collect the identifying information of their visitors to verify the age of visitors. Okay. The vast majority of adult sites today, in other words, pretty much everyone except us and a handful of others, simply don't comply. They don't care about that law. They don't care about the government of Texas, and they are absolutely flouting it. We comply with it, and we comply with it by not offering adult content to Texans. That is complying with the law. At the same time, we've mounted a constitutional challenge to that law. We were successful at trial, by the way. A federal court judge struck down that law as being unconstitutional. The state appealed it, and the Supreme Court has now agreed to hear our appeal of that case. So that's complying with the law. That is absolutely respecting the law. My hope is that parents see that and ask themselves questions. You have a platform on one hand that respects the law by not offering service in that jurisdiction, by also proposing other solutions. Like I said, we're of the view this can't be done on a site-by-site basis. The idea of giving your ID to tens of thousands of adult sites is just ludicrous. We wouldn't accept it in any other issue. For any other issue, why should we accept it here? We want this to happen at the source, at the device or the browser. But then parents can look at other sites that have simply not complied with the law and are continuing to offer content in contravention of that Texan law. My view is when you look at it objectively, you see a platform that wants to get it right, but just is very clear that this is not getting it right. We very much want to protect children, but it's not through laws like this.
Solomon, I want to also segue into, because I want to continue this discussion about the lawful process. So there's what's required, and then there's also things you guys have gone above and beyond to do that we're actually working on making available to law enforcement and other big tech companies, but also to balance the conversation, because from the perspective of a lot of advocacy groups, children should not access that content. So a lot of the responsibility is placed on the platform to essentially parent the child or help the families avoid that content. So I see the multiple layers in this discussion. I think an interesting thing to add is also the 30-month investigation that the DOJ did. Can you talk about that?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So shortly after the publication of the New York Times opinion column in December of 2020, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York opened an investigation into MindGeek. That's what ALO was called prior to it being rebranded in August of last year. And all the information that I'm going to give you now is accessible to the public. I'm a real believer, maybe there's the lawyer in me, that people should review source documents and original material when it's available. So I really recommend, and I'd be happy, Kim, I've provided you with these links, and feel free to share them widely with your audience, to read the original documents from the DOJ, as well as ALO's press release. And I'll start with that. So in those documents, it requires that the U.S. Attorney's Office vet and review the public statement that we made, and to ensure that it's truthful and accurate. So in that investigation, which was a 30-month investigation, this is what the Justice Department reported in their documents. Number one, the company fully complied and cooperated with it. They made available all the documents and individuals requested by the U.S. Attorney's Office. In the course of that 30-month investigation, the U.S. Attorney's Office concluded the following. Number one, they did not find evidence of the violation of federal statutes related to sex trafficking or child sex abuse material. So that was their conclusion. What they did, and this is their allegation, is they identified a single content partner, that's a professional studio, who had provided content to MindGeek to appear on its platforms. MindGeek received complaints from individuals who appeared in that content, forwarded those complaints back to the studio partner. The studio partner provided documentation. Okay, and that is the tragic part. As it turns out, that documentation was obtained fraudulently. It was obtained by fraud and coercion by this content partner. MindGeek knew that there was civil litigation, that is, this company had been sued, but the material remained on the platform until they were charged criminally. Once they were charged criminally, it all came down. Now, obviously, that's not good enough. Platforms need to be really vigilant that even when you get documentation, if there's things like civil litigation, that material is actioned immediately. Now, the Department of Justice in their document indicates why they are proceeding by way of a deferred prosecution agreement. They highlight the company's commitment to trust and safety, the safety tools, which I'm happy to talk about here, the work with law enforcement, particularly under the new ownership group, and the fact they find as a fact that the company was not a party to the illegal sex trafficking conducted by this rogue studio. So that, to me, that really puts to rest allegations about criminality or allegations about sex trafficking or profiting off child sex abuse material. Take it from no better source. The DOJ did a 30-month investigation, and their conclusions are open. I'm very proud of the process that's followed. I'm also proud of the fact that a company takes responsibility when others have been harmed through the use of its platform. One of the things that the company has pledged to do through this agreement is to compensate the victims, because of course these rogue studios don't have any money anymore. The founders have gone to jail, as they should go to jail. They don't have any money, and these victims deserve compensation. The company is going to voluntarily compensate them, as well as the imposition of a monitor that's essentially a law firm appointed by the Department of Justice to ensure that what we're doing is what we say we are doing, and we'll continue to do so for the next 3 years.
I think that's excellent. So just to say it, go ahead, but just to say very clearly, the DOJ found no criminal activity. There was no charges. There was nothing illegal found on your platform. Is that correct? Other than that non-consensual piece.
That single studio, and the DOJ, as part of this deferred prosecution agreement, laid one charge of a what's called an unlawful monetary transaction. That's paying this studio. That charge will be dismissed. The company has pleaded not guilty to that charge, and in this agreement, according to the Justice Department's agreement, that charge will be dismissed as part of a deferred prosecution agreement in recognition of a whole host of things, including our commitment to trust and safety, our software processes, our moderation, our work with law enforcement, et cetera.
Very cool. Go ahead, Adam.
I know earlier in the conversation you mentioned, like Facebook's numbers and versus your guys' numbers at, you said 2,500, I believe. Policy and process for those 2,500, and this is going to be a two-part question. What did those numbers look like before March of 23?
Yeah. So NECMEX reports are available with respect to the company, I believe, and I'm going to double check this, going back to 2020, so 2020, 2021. So the numbers have come down, but I think they started at like the 4,000 number, not the tens of thousands or the millions. So to give you an idea, we say cut in half, that goes from like 4,000 to 2,500. Throughout all of our NECMEC reporting, in my view, and you can form your own opinion by looking at the information, we have a minuscule share in terms of child sex abuse material online. It's just, I know this from my work as a defense counsel, speaking to prosecutors about it. Mainstream pornography platforms are not where this real host of child exploitation is happening. That's happening on peer-to-peer networks, file sharing, and on your mainstream, quote, kid-oriented platforms. But I'm really proud of, it's not like this is a brand new result in 2023, but obviously our job is to eradicate it. And that means to get to zero, which brings me to the NECMEX conclusion in 2023. So aside from reports, and I will, Adam, get to exactly how we generate reports and the process that's followed, NECMEC also sends notices. So notices is where NECMEC has identified content that was not reported, okay? So in 2023, they reported that for the Meta properties, they sent about 200 of those notices. That is a notice of actual CSAM that wasn't a report, and then they note a takedown time. In 2023, NECMEC identified 0 pieces of actual CSAM on all ALO properties. They found 2 instances of text that is what appeared to be the name of a victim in a search URL that was actioned in under a day. But not one single piece of actual CSAM was detected by NECMEC through the use of their notices. So to me, like, what further confirmation could you possibly need that this is working, that having industry-leading trust and safety program is actually working when NECMEC's conclusion is 0? Not one notice of actual CSAM sent to the platform in 2023. I'm happy to talk about the process, if you'd like, in terms of how those reports get generated, and most importantly, at what stage they get generated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, so it's really, really important to underscore that included in those 2,500 odd reports, that does not mean that there were ever 2,500 actual or suspected pieces of CSAM available to the public. Because of the moderation process, there are so many junctures where that material can be caught before it ever goes public. That's what happens when you have real-time moderation for all content. So first of all, as I said, every piece of content is automatically run through every available database that we can subscribe to. And we list them because we're proud of this work and we have nothing to hide. We publish a transparency report twice a year in which we list all the tools that we use and the metrics that come out of the use of those tools. So anything that's detected as being a probable CSAM match from one of those tools never even makes it to human moderation. It gets immediately quarantined. A person doesn't even get to see it, gets quarantined. It gets sent to legal counsel, and a report to NECMEC is generated from there. So our reports come through automated processes of screening for CSAM. Second of all, a moderator who reviews content and believes that it may be CSAM, by the way, we don't use likely or probable or certainly CSAM. We use potential CSAM. That's our threshold. And once again, that can include play acting. That can include if we determine via the content and the context of the piece of content, for example, let's say, well, this person's bedroom looks very young. They're kind of role-playing a young age. That's classified as potential CSAM and would include part of those reports. Obviously, NECMEC might see that and say, yeah, this is play acting. We're not going to send this off for investigation, but that's their determination. We let them make that determination. In addition, the report that we send, because as I said, all this content is coming up through a verified uploader, we can also send NECMEC all the information of that uploader. They're a real person. It's not an email address and a username. And we send all of that so it can be actioned by local law enforcement that have jurisdiction depending on where this content was uploaded. So it can happen both automatically and through manual review. There's one final place where it can happen. And to me, this really goes to the heart of the allegations we see published in the media, in my view, by very irresponsible advocates who say, I know that there's illegal content on this platform. Well, if you know there's illegal content on the platform, at the bottom of every single one of our pages is a content removal request form. All you need to do is indicate that you have firsthand knowledge that it's child sex abuse material or non-consensual intimate imagery, and it will be taken down immediately. No lag, no wait time. That is, take down first, ask questions later. The investigation happens once the material is removed. So anyone who claims that they have knowledge of illegal content, the fact that they haven't filled out a content removal request form means that for whatever perverse reason, they want it to still be up online, or they're not telling the truth about what's actually on the platform. So you can look at the content removal request form yourself. That's an immediate way to disable content. And Adam, if those aren't enough paths, I got one more for you. ALO has partnered with 59 and counting non-governmental organizations to give them what's called trusted flagger access to the platform. That is, we recognize that victims may not feel comfortable going to a porn site to seek redress or to have something removed, but they can go to many advocacy groups, both for non-consensual content and for child sex abuse material, and that platform has unfettered access to disable any piece of content they want for any reason, and then the company will investigate after. And by the way, Adam, the door is always open for new NGOs to join that. It's not a closed list. We want organizations in every country, in every language to provide maximal access. So it's really a company that prioritizes the safety of young people and the vulnerable. And you can see just how many paths and avenues there are to try to keep that platform safe and, of course, free of child sex abuse material.
And I'll just add, just in case if any listeners are hearing about those options that Saul mentioned, again, like Saul said, every single video on the website content removal form can be filled out. But should an individual not want to be on the site, there are organizations that Saul mentioned, Trusted Flaggers. I'll just mention two of them immediately so that if people are listening and they do want these resources, it's Stop NCII, and the other one is Cyber Civil Rights Safety Center. Those are two organizations that can immediately remove content from our websites.
And Adam, I'd love to also explain, and I'm of course always happy to answer questions about any of this, that we're of the view that keeping CSAM off the platform, that is, keeping the content free of exploitative material, is not enough, okay? And there's something else that we think is really, really important, and it's a program that we've implemented over the past couple of years, and that is our deterrence messaging program. So when you search for one of 50,000 banned words, now you might think to yourself, like most normal people do, what do you need 50,000 banned words for? There's only so many ways to say young person or child. But unfortunately, the perverse people who are looking for this material and creating it, they use all kinds of clever keywords, code words to disguise their true intent. We stay up to date on that, constantly updating this list. But if you search for those terms, and you can take an easy one, for example, search for underage, okay? Search for 16-year-old, 17-year-old on the platform. First of all, you're going to see no results because there are no results to return. But we don't even, the platform doesn't even display different results. They display no results, but they also display deterrence messaging. That's a strict warning that this is illegal. And in every jurisdiction where we have a partner, which includes the United States and Canada, and the UK and France and others, we have partnered with mental health organizations to try to redirect individuals looking for that kind of material so that they can get help to assist them with their criminal urges. Because, of course, we could just say, look, we don't have any of that stuff on our platform. We just delivered a big black box that says no. But we have individuals who are looking for illegal content. They're not going to find it here. But if you have those people's attention, you can redirect them to get them real world help. We've seen two things happen as a result of that. And once again, don't take my word for it. The University of Tasmania released a study on this efforts. I'm happy to provide the URL. It's easy to find online. There were articles in Wired and elsewhere about it. Two things happened. Number one, the number of searches for illegal content on the platform fell. So that means it actually deterred people from looking for that kind of content, which is a fabulous thing. Second of all, dozens of individuals got real world help. They moved from the internet to the real world to get real world help and counseling to potentially stop offending. Now, we don't know what the fruits of that are going to be. My view is if one of those interventions is successful and you can save one child from a life of misery, it's all worth it. And those are programs that not only we're proud of, we want them to be copied widely. We think the mainstream internet should be using them. We think every adult platform should be using them. And our blueprint for them is free and available to anybody who wants to implement them.
See, that right there, just to interject, because to me, that's such an important focus of this conversation. Earlier, we were talking about age verification. Yes, there are things that we can still approve on, like Soloman was talking about device-based age verification, for example. But to me, this is really the point of this entire conversation. ECP has implemented tech that can not only identify and prevent child sexual abuse material, but they're wanting to make that available to law enforcement and to other tech platforms. So, for example, if we were to apply the same energy to Google saying, why don't you require age verification for people to view inappropriate content on your platform? Google, Meta, Twitter, all these other tech giants that have inappropriate content on their platform currently today, which is public, which does not require any type of age verification or verification process to upload the content. So this is a solvable problem. And we, the people, need to know that, because once we have that awareness, then we can hold these tech giants accountable to do the right thing. And if they fail to implement these very rigorous solutions, that's intentional. And we can actually vote with our dollars and not support the companies who are not implementing these proactive safeguards.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are doing quite a bit to be proactive against against crimes against children. Where do you see the company falling short, and what measures are being taken to bolster that area?
Yeah, so I'll say this, that, in trust and safety, particularly, we live in a digital era. The adversary moves very quickly, and we must move quickly as well. So if I would highlight, areas that the company's, really working on, because these are trends of the future, they're as follows. So the first one is device-based age verification. Okay. Young people should not be able to access adult content. The tools exist today. So, Kim mentioned Google. So let's talk about Google for a second. Google has the safe search functionality built into all of its products. That is, it limits the results that are returned and what young people can do online. The trouble is, number one, it's not mandatory. And number two, it has no, at least not worldwide, they're experimenting in a couple of jurisdictions, it has no way of verifying that this person's a young person or a child. So if a kid wants to make themselves 21, they make themselves 21. If they want to make themselves 16, they can do that as well. So we want to work, and we need to, as an adult company, but also as the industry, we need to work with the mainstream platform providers to keep young people off of these platforms. That's a priority. The second priority is the evolution of AI content. And I'll tell you this, Kim, maybe it's just fortuitous timing, but I'll tell you a real anecdote from this morning, okay? First of all, I'll say our platforms have absolutely zero tolerance for deep-faked content. So whether it's of an adult or a young person, we view deep-fake content as being non-consensual content. It doesn't matter that it's computer generated. It falls into the same content as any non-consensual imagery. We also view AI-generated content of young people to be child sex abuse material and have a zero tolerance policy for it. I was on Facebook today, and I was scrolling through my Facebook feed when I came to a link. And the link was for an AI generator that basically said, remove the clothes off any photo. So I did what a responsible person would do. I reported that ahead. I'm of the view that that's not just inappropriate, but it's illegal. That's on Facebook, a mainstream platform. Those ads are absolutely banned from ALO's platforms. ALO also relies on advertising. Those are absolutely banned. The use of those is banned. But we need to keep both the social and the technical progress going in order to detect this. Now, on our platform, the detection is pretty straightforward. It actually doesn't require an individual to determine is it real or is it AI, because we require the ID of all involved. So you go back and you think about how the AI-generated nude images of Taylor Swift swept through a platform like Twitter, X. Those never would have passed even the most cursory review. Why? Because the moderator would say, I don't have Taylor Swift's ID here. That person can't appear in content. This must be either straight non-consensual or AI-generated non-consensual. In any event, it has no place on the platform. But criminals are getting smarter. They're always engaged in ways to circumvent the law. We need to stay ahead of them. And we need to have that same discussion with mainstream platforms. You can't be advertising a service like that essentially generates non-consensual intimate imagery of any person, and on a mainstream platform, no less. So, it's sort of interesting. People have a certain view of the adult industry when really, and I think the truth just speaks for itself, it's actually light years ahead of where mainstream is. Mainstream is really catching up now on all the fronts that I described, but we can't rest easy. There's a reason this company has almost 500 engineers, and 20% of the company's 1,400 employee workforce works exclusively in trust and safety. That's a massive investment. Like that number doesn't work at any other big company, Google, Microsoft, Apple, 20% working in trust and safety. But because for ALO, that's a focus, and it means innovating, and it means catching the criminals, before they have a chance to determine, and create this future technology.
Yeah, and I'll add just that, we're not keeping these innovations, this information, this research, we're not keeping it to ourselves. We're meeting with governments. So we're very, very public about our efforts to meet with governments around the world. Any of the research that we're doing with regards to age verification, we make that available to governments. You can go up on even some government websites where they post some of our submissions. Those are made public. So the idea here is that as we are researching various forms of age verification, as we're researching various forms of keeping our platform safer, we're sharing that information with law enforcement, governments, as well as others in the industry, because we don't think this is proprietary. We don't think keeping the internet safe is something that only we are responsible for. And then the final piece of that, government, industry, and the other piece of that is the public. Certainly people don't come to our website to be educated about how to keep themselves safe. And that's why we have to do interviews like this to explain to people how our site can be safer for themselves, but also for their loved ones. Some of the responsibility absolutely is on guardians and family members, but we have to, as a company, we have to make that information easy for people to access. And shows like this that are reaching out to the public are going to learn about things, and you never have to even come to our website to find out how to keep your loved ones safe.
Yeah, it seems like you guys are definitely doing a great job of being proactive and trying to protect those that are involved in your site and those within the company and everything else. And from a legal standpoint, that's amazing. But like from a social development standpoint, what role do you think your site plays in the development of society?
Well, I mean, so I start with one premise, which is pornography is not just legal, it is constitutionally protected, okay, in virtually every Western liberal democracy. So a government, even if you are of the view that pornography is negative or should be outlawed, it can't be outlawed. So then you get a decision. Should it be regulated and safe and responsible? Or should it just be stigmatized and sneered at and insulted to move people further and further into the shadows, right? And we know what festers in the shadows, right? It's, when things are out in the open and they're discussed openly and proudly, then we can, Adam, you draw on your law enforcement experience, then we can have open conversation with law enforcement, which we do regularly, by the way. Our trust and safety operations are led by the former commander of the New York State Internet Crimes Against Children Division, right? We have a former director from NECMEC working in our trust and safety because we're willing to be open and talk about this, right? So from a social perspective, I'm also of the view, and Sarah, of course, can feel free to elaborate on this. Like, we're not the tastemakers, right? We don't set the trends in that regard. I often say there's an old academic piece that says pornography is a mirror held up on society. So it's like you look in the mirror and you don't like what's in the mirror. What do? Smash the mirror? You get mad at the mirror? No, maybe look inside, right? That this is a reflection of people's tastes and trends, etc. Now, of course, as a baseline, it must be legal, it must be safe, it must be responsible. But ultimately, I think it's more of a reflection of society than a driver of it.
Yeah, Adam, I'll just simply add that, I feel we do have a responsibility to those who are on the internet generally, the general public, young people and consenting adults, but we also have a responsibility towards those who are creating content. And so we do also support content creators with resources that are available on our website, but also with our partnerships. So we absolutely do not believe that we are the arbiters of what should be permitted in legal environments with regards to adult content. But we do understand that content creators are disproportionately targeted through either banks, being doxxed in their communities, because there's a lot of stigma surrounding this industry and choosing this industry as your labor, which is legal labor in the US. And so we do also partner with organizations that can serve appropriately content creators. So be it Swap Behind Bars, Pineapple Support for mental health support, Cupcake Girls. These are organizations that are experts at supporting content creators. We are not experts at supporting content creators, but we recognize that it's so important that we support organizations that are supporting content creators. So, it's not just about users that come to visit our site. It's also about content creators who are creating this content. They too need to be kept safe.
Right. Soloman brought up a really good point, and I want to highlight that. Because again, for all the well-meaning advocacy groups and advocates who are saying porn is bad, take down PornHub. What happens when if hypothetically we were to take down the biggest platforms that are willing to be regulated? Where does that demand go? To Soloman's point, it goes to the black market, into the shadows, as he said. And are people safer there? Is that better for children? Does that mean we have more insight and control into child exploitation and exploitation in general? Why would we not work together for solutions? So Adam, I appreciate your approach when we spoke about this initiative. We can agree to disagree about certain lifestyles or beliefs or policies or whatever it is that people may differ on, but what we should all agree on is that we should all unite to protect children. We should put our differences aside when it comes to everything else, but protecting children should be at the core by which each decision is made. So I don't think it's any form of a solution. If hypothetically PornHub were to go down, what happens, by the way, to all the other adult content platforms? What happens to all the other inappropriate content on the internet? And where does that demand go? We need to think holistically in our approach, not only when we make, accusations or advocate for change, but be clear in our intent. What is our intent here? It's to protect children. It's not to take freedoms and rights away from adults or to make their environment less safe. To Sarah's point, there are consenting adults who choose this lifestyle. How can we make sure they're safe and protected and also not inadvertently contributing to child exploitation? For the adults who want to consume adult content, that's not my problem. My point is they should not be inadvertently contributing to child harm. Platforms should not be convoluted with adult sexual entertainment and child exploitation. Absolutely not. So having 100%. This discussion is a big part of bringing the real problems and the real solutions to light, so that the experts can unite around the holistic solutions that are actually going to solve problems long-term, not just put Band-Aid on things.
Yeah, and I'll say this, in terms of the company's platforms, one of the things that we do is we speak regularly to NGOs and advocacy groups so that we can learn, right? Like the company's not experts on child sex abuse material, but if you're not willing to talk with those who are fighting that on the front lines, you're never going to improve. There's a reason that just last year, the Internet Watch Foundation announced not only a partnership with ALO, but that they had published a code of good conduct that is best practices for combating child sex abuse material in partnership with ALO, that is based on ALO's procedures and policies. But you can't do that unless you have dialogue going both ways. And if people just want to be involved in name calling, they're never going to contribute productively to solving this issue, which in my view is eminently solvable.
Yeah, I agree. Kim, I'm glad you're recording this because I'm about to agree with the defense attorney here. I wholeheartedly believe that there's definitely the legal responsibility, to protect minors, but we also have freedom of speech, right? We have what's constitutionally protected, and I am all about upholding our Constitution, our freedom of speech rights. So I definitely agree with you guys there. And to Kim's point, it's going to go somewhere, right? Like, it's the reason why, we can take drugs away from people, but they're still going to go find drugs somewhere in an alley or in a park somewhere or on the street. Like, people are going to find what they want to find, like where they're, no matter what. So the fact that you were just open and honest about the conversation and that you guys are taking so many proactive measures to protect our children is really a great thing. So whether you have a great or a negative opinion of pornography or not, I think the conversation that we just had is really important because it's not going away. And if it's going to be there, you guys might as well do something proactive to provide adults the content they're going to seek anyway, and also give it a safe place where we can protect children at the same time.
Absolutely. Adam, I'd love to know from your perspective in law enforcement and having worked with so many women and children, what are some effective strategies that you'd like to see platforms like ECP's platforms implement to protect the innocent?
In all reality, a lot of the stuff that Soloman has explained is a lot of the things that I would have liked to have seen 5 and 10 years ago, and the proactive measures that they're taking, especially with like AI coming out, you know, like, and there's so many fakes, and I'm really glad to see that you view the deep fakes from AI exactly the same as if it were real person content. Because I know there's definitely some controversy around that, like, well, it's not a real person and doesn't really hurt anybody. And I think it just kind of feeds into the viewer and to kind of really deepen that neural pathway for them, right? Like, so humans are built on patterns of behavior, whether we're talking about, you know, our daily lives or our workout routines or whatever. Is like, we like the same repetition, and, you know, pornography is the same way. And the easier pathway that we give somebody to view the content that's illegal and that harms our children, the more they're going to seek it out.
Yeah, you know, Adam, and I'll just take this opportunity, if you don't mind, to plug our home country of Canada here. And I know I'm on a podcast with two wonderful Americans, but Canada made that decision about 35 years ago to treat virtual depictions, whether it's hand-drawn, a cartoon, or 3D rendered, very realistic, or even written depictions of child sex abuse material, to treat it like an actual photograph or video of a child, which was very controversial at the time. And, you know, free speech advocates protested. It went up to the Supreme Court of Canada. And in Canada, the Supreme Court decided that what this does is it does a couple of things. First of all, it normalizes sexual interactions with children. It also, and I think this is what you're getting at, it creates a market for the sexual abuse of children. Even though this individual image or story or whatever itself did not victimize an actual child, it promotes the victimization of young people by sexualizing them and normalizing sexuality and creating this demand for it. So that's the policy that ALO has adopted, that's the standard, that CSAM child sex abuse material includes even human-generated child or machine-generated child sex abuse material. And for exactly those reasons, you know, as a social norm, this is something that we very much want to discourage because of the harms that it creates. So, you know, in the United States, the law is a little different, but regardless of law, you know, I always say, and this is wearing my vice president of compliance hat, complying with the law is like putting your pants on in the morning. You don't get a gold medal for it. It's just expected. What ALO does as a company goes far beyond just the legal requirements in the areas in which it operates, and that's one example.
Very nice. I do have a question about like I'm going to say hiring practice, but do you guys actually employ actors and actresses to be in the videos, or is it all uploaded content from like, you know, just your general citizens? Is it like a 1099 situation? Like, how does all that work?
Yeah, great question. So essentially there are two streams of content that goes up on PornHub and the other video sharing platforms. One is through the verified uploader program, also known as the model program. That's what we described, where ALO takes the age, identity, and consent of every uploader and everyone appearing in content, stores that securely, verifies it, moderates it, etc. The second stream of content is through the content partner program. This is from professional studios, okay? Not ALO itself, but other professional studios. And it's really important to underscore that. That content goes through the exact same moderation process to the same moderation standards as the content from verified uploaders. So the content comes from either individuals, you know, amateurs, et cetera, who are verified, or from studios, but it all goes through the same moderation process. On the other side of the business, on the pay site or the premium side of the business, ALO commissions content from professional studios, content that it then owns and then sells sort of on a Netflix monthly subscription model. But once again, that's all produced according to the standards and on the same moderation principles and trust and safety principles as the verified uploader content, so it's just really important that whatever the source of that content is, the verified uploader, content partners, or studios commissioned by ALO, the trust and safety standards are one and the same.
Yeah. With a lot of those actresses, statistically speaking, it is probably likely that not all of them are doing this voluntarily. Is there any measures being taken to fight trafficking in this space?
Yeah, so the platforms take extraordinary measures to do it. So I'll start at the very beginning. The verified uploader requirement itself is a massive factor in fighting trafficking, because that means that the account holder has now been identified as a real person, right? That's a huge disincentive for somebody to exploit others for their own gain, having given all their personal information. The second one is on the payout side. So the company is very serious about ensuring, and has a number of controls in a number of different areas to ensure that the individuals getting the financial benefit are the people who themselves are appearing in content, right? Which once again is another disincentive to the exploitation side, right? You exploit someone by taking the financial benefit of their work, but by controlling where those payouts go and ensuring that we have all the information about the recipients and beneficiaries, that's another way that we cut it off. We also work with anti-sex trafficking organizations. So an example of that would be the Cupcake Girls out of Nevada. Signed a partnership with them to, number one, promote best practices to fight sex trafficking, but also ALO collaborated with the Cupcake Girls to produce educational videos for individuals working in this arena as to how to avoid exploitation and stay away from sex trafficking and putting themselves in vulnerable situations. So the answer, Adam, is yes, yes, and yes. We take a really top-down approach to ensure that the individuals producing this content are doing so voluntarily and are not being exploited through any external factors. Now, I need to underscore this because it's so important in this work. I had a number of misconceptions, I would say, before I got into this ownership group role about the industry, whether it was about exploitation or coercion, et cetera. In that time, we have consulted with, and I've heard from individually dozens and dozens, and we've done consultations with hundreds and hundreds of creators who maintain that this is their livelihood. This is their vocation. This is work that benefits them financially, in fact, that supports them financially. And I always say it's a grave error to conflate sex work with sex trafficking. It's the same error as conflating work and slavery. There is work, and some people, by the way, love their jobs. Some people don't like their jobs. Some people have easy jobs. Some people have hard jobs. Some people have good days at work and bad days at work, but none of them are slavery. What we have a zero tolerance for and put our money where our mouth is, both in internal controls and in support for organizations, is fighting slavery, sex trafficking. That is absolutely unacceptable. And to us, we don't want there to be any overlap between those two worlds, and we're doing everything possible in order to prevent that.
So where do you believe the responsibility ends when it comes to that? So, for example, I've worked with many women, especially battered women, who, defended their husbands up and down despite the abuse, despite the trafficking they experienced. And then I would maybe run into them years later where they had finally gotten out. And of course, the stories they told me during my initial contacts and interviews were lies. And that they were actually being held against their will, and they were doing this, and basically they were under his control. So where do you think that responsibility ends on your guys' part?
It's a shared responsibility. So number one, we as a platform have to do everything we can to ensure the legitimacy of the uploader, their identity, and also to ensure that the financial benefit only goes to them, okay? Is not going to third parties who are standing in between and exploiting. But let's take a step back and go back, let's say, to December 2020. Okay, so the New York Times opinion column is published. The trafficking hub movement gains traction, and Visa and MasterCard suspend their processing of services on the PornHub domain for user-generated content. Right. So the quote-unquote advocates celebrate. They've taken PornHub down. They've stopped trafficking. Instead, what has happened is the following. That revenue was an 80-20 split, 80% to the creators, that is gone. And the creators start saying, this was our livelihood. Now what we actually have to turn to, Adam, is far more dangerous and far more vulnerable means of sex work. Put ourselves in much more harm in order to earn a living when we had a perfectly safe living, working from behind our computers or behind our cameras, away from vulnerable situations that we all know exist in the sex work industry, and the quote unquote advocates, the people fighting to end trafficking, they're the reason I can't pay rent this month. Or they're the reason, by the way, my bank has suspended their relations and I have to go to some nefarious third party, someone who's going to, potentially exploit me in order to give me financial services. So I think like the more you try to put this, like I go back to that same concept, put in the shadows and put it in the dark, all you're going to do is allow exploitation to fester. If you can't, for example, if a creator can't use a mainstream financial service like PayPal or Venmo or their bank, who do you think they're going to turn to? They're going to turn to the folks who are really nasty people but will happily provide financial services. And we know what those financial services look like. To me, the responsibility of the solution is to allow them to have a platform where they can do this work legally and responsibly. And where that platform has the public scrutiny, right? And has these relations with law enforcement. The more you push people into the dark, the more you allow traffickers and those who are bent on exploitation, they will prosper, right? It benefits only them when society as a whole won't deal openly with sex work.
Yeah, and I'll add, Adam, that, having a seat at the table. So, we're very actively trying to get a seat at the table with governments, because governments are the ones that are writing these laws by which content creators and consenting adult users have to be regulated. And so if governments are going to introduce laws that impact content creators as well as legal users, then the industry needs to be at the table. We can't simply have laws that are introduced that have these unintended consequences that Saul is speaking about without the government understanding that information. And so there was just, coming back to our conversation about age verification, there was recently a piece that I read in the Salt Lake City. It was a Utah newspaper, the Salt Lake City Weekly, that did a bit of a report on what has age verification looked like in Utah since the law was introduced? This is a news story, not an opinion piece. What does it look like in Utah? And one of the unintended consequences that this journalist spoke about was that the access to porn has not diminished. In fact, it's just been diverted towards less legal or less compliant sites. So you haven't removed the demand. You haven't removed the human requirement to have this in your life, and yet you've introduced this unintended consequence, which is driving traffic towards companies that don't comply with the law like we have. And to another point you had made much earlier, which was that we fled states. Removing our platforms from states that introduce age verification laws is complying with the law. That's, in fact, a very difficult decision for companies, and we're not the only company, but it's a really difficult decision to make because you're removing that access to content creators, access to income, but also to our companies. And so it's not fleeing. In fact, it's making a really difficult decision about removing your platform when you know that that's not actually going to have the intended result, which the government wants, which is keeping kids safe. It isn't. But we have to make those decisions because, as Saul said, we are never going to compromise personal private information of our adult users. So just, there are a lot of resources out there that the public can read. This great article in the Salt Lake City, again, we had nothing, we weren't interviewed for it, we weren't a part of it, but just, media are starting to, these laws have been introduced for a short period of time now, some up to a year, and reports are starting to come out about how this is a failure and that you're leading people towards, governments have very few chances to introduce regulations. And when they do, if you lose the confidence of the public, you've lost your chance. So to answer your question, the other piece we need to do is be at the table with governments when they're writing laws.
Absolutely agreed. As someone who has worked with many survivors of child trafficking and various forms of exploitation, there are adults who decide to continue their career in consensual sex work, but now on their own terms. And they actually can find their own sense of empowerment from that, meaning not being controlled by a pimp or someone who is trafficking them and now collecting their own income. Now, that's not a life choice that I've made, but I definitely support those who have done that of their own accord. We're talking about platforms like PornHub that give content creators the opportunity to post their content and generate income. Again, if we were to take that large player away that's willing to be regulated, where do those content creators go? And are we applying the same requirements to platforms like OnlyFans and the others I don't even know the names of, who aren't necessarily implementing the same safeguards and proactive measures and regulations? So how can we ensure those individuals have a safe option where they're not on the streets or being controlled by a pimp or being trafficked by other means, how can we implement not only safeguards and proactive measures, but also how are organizations that are concerned with that type of exploitation supporting those people who may be resorting to that work because that's their last choice. Now, I know people who have, again, escaped sex trafficking, for example, and that was really their only form of survival. Now, rhetorical question, who else is supporting survivors? Where else do they go for support? So do you see why I think we need a holistic approach, not only in uncovering the root cause of these issues instead of just putting Band-Aids on them, but also in bringing the various categories of experts together to not only discuss, but solve these problems?
Yeah, and I know to your point with like who is also playing a role in the sex trafficking game, it's the Johns, right? So I know Maricopa County years ago was targeting the Johns instead of the prostituted women because they were not looking at them like offenders anymore. They were offering them diversion programs and kind of a way out. And they saw that the people that were driving this business is the one that law enforcement was starting to target. So I really appreciate your guys' like holistic approach on everything. I do want to touch back on like the leaving the states thing. I don't know if I missed a key piece of information, but can you break that down very simplistically for me? I guess for perception, it looks like you were leaving those states because they were causing you guys to have some safeguards. And so can you just explain that real quick again?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So these laws in general, because each state has a slightly different flavor, but they're fairly consistent. They require platforms that have over a certain percentage of their content being adult content to collect the personal identifying information of visitors in order to confirm their age. So we'll just start with that. It's obvious that these laws are doomed to failure when they target a platform like PornHub, but not Reddit. Reddit's got a huge library of adult content. By the way, the largest quote unquote pornography website in the world is Google Images. Google Images has more adult content than all the adult platforms combined because they are a catalog, a search engine, and they have all that content archived and cached, but it wouldn't apply to them. So it would apply only to people going to adult platforms. We're of the view that that law is wrong for two important reasons. Number one, young people who will be faced with an age barrier when they get to the Pornhub website, if we indeed implemented that, will simply go elsewhere. There's no way of playing whack-a-mole and having tens of thousands of sites comply. They'll go elsewhere. So number one, it won't protect children. It won't protect a single child. They'll go to Pornhub, get a dialogue blocking them. Next thing you know, they'll be off to the next adult website on the list. But even more fundamental than not protecting children, it exposes the private data of individuals to tremendous jeopardy. It requires that tens of thousands of websites located in jurisdictions all over the world, and depending how you count it, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of porn sites, to collect the most sensitive personal information. So imagine there are three categories of the most sensitive information. Number one, your real identity. Number two, your government documentation. Number three, the fact that you're about to watch porn. Like that is a privacy disaster. And so we as a company had to make a decision, which is ALO's decided, am I going to implement this, put people's private information in jeopardy, and it doesn't even protect any children at the same time? It clearly doesn't, as the Utah experience is showing. There are so many non-compliant platforms. So instead, the company took the decision. It's a tough decision, right? It's a commercially difficult decision to not offer services in those states and to challenge the laws through the courts. And at the same time, to work for the real solution, which is device-based age verification. Your device already knows everything about you. It would be a very simple matter to also add to that confirmation of your age, which it probably knows already, particularly if you're on a subscription plan, you rent your device from a major provider, it knows who you are and what your age is. And then your device would be your key to the adult internet, by the way, not just to porn. This is required. You mentioned Jack Daniels for alcohol sales, for tobacco and cannabis and gambling and explicit video games, voting, all sorts of things where age verification is required. That's what we're working towards, because a site-based measure is just, it's doomed to fail and will actually make our kids less safe. How will it make them less safe? Because when they're blocked from Pornhub, they're just going to go to a site that has fewer regulations, that has really dangerous content on it, that's far less regulated. So our view, in order to ensure that it's very clear, we think this is doomed to fail and it's going to make kids less safe, we simply said, we are not participating. We are not displaying adult content in those markets. And we have withdrawn our service from those states.
Okay, that definitely cleared up all the questions I had. So thank you for clarifying that.
Of course.
And so I'm sorry. I thought somebody was going to say something. My apologies.
No, it's all you.
So those measures, so basically what you're saying is this method's not working, so we're not going to do it. And it puts our users at risk by putting in your driver's license number to like fraud, identity theft, and things like that. Is that what I'm gathering?
Well, think about it this way, Adam. And I know you're not going to copy this lucrative business idea because you're not a criminal, but if you were a criminal, it would be far more profitable to simply create the front end of an adult site, tell people, look, I'm sorry, the government says I have to take all of your information, and then go ahead and you'll make much more money selling that information on the black market than you ever would marketing a free porn site with ads. So like the incentives that this creates for all kinds of misconduct are just monumental. And yes, we're in an era where governments are telling us all the time, don't share your personal information online. Keep it as safe as you possibly can. Don't give it to every site that asks for it. And then you have a government like the government of Texas saying, no, give it to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of porn websites. And it's just, it's doomed to failure and could result in real harm. So we won't be part of that. We won't collect that information, which means we'll comply with the law by not operating until the Supreme Court, number one, rules on this, or device-based age verification, the obvious solution here, is widely adopted.
I think that's a good perspective that most people don't think about. We kind of tend to look at things in our own lens and the way that we feel like it should be looked at, and we typically don't see it from another point of view. And to be honest, the fraud aspect of it is not a perspective that I've ever really considered before. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And the word unintended consequences has been brought up, multiple times in this conversation. And I think no matter what we do, I mean, if I cured cancer tomorrow, there would be unintended consequences to that curing, right? We would probably put some companies out of business. We may be overpopulated. There would be things that we didn't even think about. So what do you think are the unintended consequences of the pornography industry in general, and not from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I'll say this, and then Sarah's been really involved with our consultations. One of the things that we did when we approached this investment was actually to approach it with a lot of humility. That is, not to pretend like we are the sociologists, like we are the experts on this industry. Obviously, we have certain skills and education and background that we think can really help the broader internet and the industry. So the first thing we actually did was we embarked on a 12-month listening tour. We retained a board of advisors. The only adult company with an independent advisory board, so that they could reach out and in all of their networks, this includes, by the way, the tech industry, national security, law enforcement, anti-money laundering and financial auditing, as well, of course, the sex work industry. And we produced a report, which Sarah can be very, very proud of. She led the publication of that report on our website, a What We Heard report that touches on these issues, but without there are too many bros who enter industries these days and think that they have all the answers. That is not what we're doing here. It was really important for us to get expert advice and then share what we learn. I'm happy to let Sarah chat about that a little more.
Yeah, well, Adam, I'll start by saying you're right that we are often talking about unintended consequences because for so long, governments and the public were regulating this industry without consulting with this industry. In the defense of governments and the public, it's been really hard to engage with sex workers and content creators and the industry because it's hard to find them. And so one of the things that was really important to us right from the beginning was that we acknowledged that if we wanted to have any influence or any impact on writing laws that could help the industry and also help the general public, then we had to be public about it. We had to be transparent about it. So right from the beginning, Saul and myself made our emails available, made our names, our biographies, all of that sort of information is up on our website so that when people do wholeheartedly and genuinely want to engage with us, and as a company, they have a way to get a hold of us. So one of the things that was sort of our starting point of like, we've got to be at the table. We've got to be genuine about really wanting to impact and do good things in our roles as owners of a very large adult entertainment company. But the really wonderful thing that we've observed in the last year and a half is also the unintended advantages that have come from doing that. Adam, we've just met today, and my hope is that when you as an individual with the huge audience that you have and the huge influence that you have, at least being open to it now, that like, at least now you've met with two people who work in this industry and you're open to talking about it, and so that the removing that stigma has been so important to us. We know that, Saul sometimes says, the goal is one day, when will you've achieved everything? When porn is boring. We say it almost, in jest, but it's really about removing that stigma, because there are individuals who choose, consenting adults who choose to consume this content, and they have a right to do that from the safety of their home. And there are individuals who want to create that content, and they too have the right to create that content in safety, and make that choice for themselves. And I think the only way that we're going to get to a place where Saul and Sarah are not the only two talking about this. There are so many people who are out there advocating for this industry, and they're just, it's really pounding the pavement and getting in front of audiences and talking about this stuff, whereby one day the unintended advantage of all of this is removing that stigma.
Absolutely agree. I think dialogues like this are so important, again, to bring together the people that may not understand each other and may be able to meet a middle ground once we discuss, okay, we actually all care about the same thing, safeguarding people, safeguarding the innocent. Now, how do we achieve that? There may be some compromise in some cases. There may be a lot of things we need to work through because the internet did not exist when the Constitution of the United States was written, and there's a lot of things that aren't regulated. So again, how can we not only solve the problem about, protecting children, keeping them away from adult content, and eradicating child exploitation? All of those things are such solvable problems within the next few years. But how can we apply this concept of digital safety to the digital realm, to the internet in general, which is borderless, which doesn't it's constantly advancing. So how can we remain proactive? I believe that only happens not only with dialogue, but with various categories of experts coming together and committing to continuing to solve these problems, which will be ongoing. We will face new challenges as the internet and technology continue evolving and as organized crime continues being masterminds. But how can we prevent as many children as possible from exploitation? How can we protect the innocent? How can we help adults retain their freedoms and do things in a safe way? Again, a lot of these problems are very solvable. And I believe the disconnect has been in people avoiding this conversation. So Adam, I want to thank you not only for your time today, but your willingness to come together to understand these issues. And of course, Sarah and Soloman, I have huge respect for not only the work you guys are doing and how proactive your platforms have been, but your willingness to explain these things, to talk to people, to unpack your methods, and even make this technology available to law enforcement and to the tech world in general. I'm excited about the momentum and the things that we can do as we continue working together. And I'm definitely excited to see what's next. So I want to give each of you the floor to kind of give your last parting message, whether it's to the listeners who are concerned about child safety and might feel powerless or overwhelmed by this massive fight to protect children, or to any individual who's listening today who may still have questions or concerns, whether it's how to reach you or where you see this conversation going next.
Well, first, I want to thank you guys for coming on and having this conversation. It's been truly wonderful on my side. It's really nice to see you taking so many measures to make sure that our children are protected and looking at it from multiple angles and working with various organizations that are experts in these areas, working with law enforcement, working with the government to ensure the safety of our kids. And I think this is truly something that people really just don't understand about the company. They look at it from one particular lens, and it's probably I like porn or whatever it is, and you're making money off of it. And that's probably what 99% of people see when they look at the industry. There's probably very few people that will have the opportunity to get to speak with you all on the ins and outs of the industry and like how much effort is actually being put in to protect our kids.
Yeah, and I'll just say in that spirit. So first of all, thank you very much for having this dialogue. I think that's a really good way to distinguish between people who are looking for solutions to these problems and people who are not. You cannot come to solutions to these challenges without dialogue, without being open back and forth and open to being educated and learning. And by the way, that goes two ways. I never look at these conversations as, simply ECP blaring information. We want to learn. We want to hear about certain challenges. And if that requires, implementation or policy or practice, we're of course open to learning about that every single day. But it's really the dialogue is where that all begins. When you have a respectful dialogue, where both parties are open to learning, good things are going to happen. So this is what I'd say, my closing remarks to Adam, to Kim, to anyone watching this is, this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. We are always happy to discuss this, whether it's with advocates or with law enforcement professionals, non-governmental organizations, government. We are more than happy to both listen and share our own experiences, because as Kim said, these problems really are solvable, but they're not solvable when people are just yelling at each other from their respective echo chambers. Nothing gets done that way. So thank you so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, I'll just finish off, Saul, and say no truer words have been said. Adam, from the questions that you ask us, we learn so much, because certainly you are your own individual, but you also represent an audience. You represent an organization. And so the questions that you're asking are because they're important to you. And so although, we hope that we could answer your questions, we're also learning from every single one of these interviews that we do, because the questions that were asked, they're coming from somewhere. And so you're actually helping us better understand what the concerns are out there. And that influences how we then work with the team at ALO, how we support the team at ALO. So super important to us to just really understand where those questions are coming from. And what I would close on is that, our background, Saul and I, are very much in the space of regulations, government, and the law. And so, it sometimes is a surprise to people when we say we want to be regulated, we want to work with government, we want to work with law enforcement, because with regulations, we feel come rights. And we work in an industry that is legal, and we want rights for those who choose to work in this environment, in this industry. But we're not alone in it. We know that there are individuals that can support us in that objective that we have. So law enforcement, governments, the general public, all can play a role in supporting, but also influencing how this industry evolves. So just the final thought is, we're not in this alone, but also we all have a responsibility and a role to play in that. We can't just simply put our heads in the sand and hope that this goes away, because it's not going to go away. And the scary thing about it is that we'll go into a darker place. So let's talk about these things and let's keep working together.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all again for your time. I really enjoyed this discussion. I hope the audience has as well. And I give this shout out every time we do a podcast, but if anyone has feedback or suggestions or complaint or hate mail, please contact us, because this is about a dialogue. This is about us coming together and being willing to have these solutions discussed and also unpack the real problem, the root cause of the problem. So you can reach out to ethicalcapitalpartners.com. You can find more about Sarah Bain and Soloman Friedman and their other partners there. You can reach out to me. It's digitaldefendersunited.org. I founded a nonprofit that focuses on digital safety and protecting children in our modern era. Or you can reach out to Adam Boyd. Adam, may you please give people means that they can contact you?
Soulfultraining.com, and it's soulful like the sole of your foot, SOLEFUL training.com. And we primarily focus on mental resilience through breath work and mindfulness.
I love it. So important. Well, thank you all again. I really enjoyed this, and I look forward to more solutions-oriented dialogue. So if you know people that need to be part of this discussion, please send them our way. Please refer us. We'd be happy to have this dialogue. Thank you guys again. You have a great rest of your day.